Social media, I think, has been really pushing us, making our institutions don't work or can't work as they're supposed to. We're seeing this in universities. It's very frightening, and now it's spreading to news organizations to some extent. It's spreading to government in many ways. And so, what I'm mostly haunted by is the idea that our institutions cannot be adapted and will collapse.
How's everyone doing? Great. Okay. Oh, good. Great. I'm Laura Galinsky. I am so pleased to welcome you all for what I know is going to be an engaging, very important conversation today about such a key, consequential topic, the impact of technology on society, in particular social media. I come from a new global nonprofit organization called Project Liberty that is working to catalyze the building of a healthier tech ecosystem. And we do our work through developing an alliance of organizations in civil society and academia and research and tech companies and nonprofit organizations to ensure that we're building a robust path forward in responsible technology. And Heterodox is one of the partners, and we're co-hosting today's conversation. And so welcome for what we know will be hopefully not just a look at the problems, which we have to surface and look at and understand the correlation and the causation, but also really identify what might be the most powerful solutions going forward. So with that, John, our co-host.
Hi, I'm John Tomasi. I'm the president of Heterodox Academy. HxA, as we call ourselves, is a membership organization of 5,800 as of today, professors, and some administrators and students who are from all around the world, all different disciplines, different ideologies, but who share a commitment to core values of university life, including open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, and constructive disagreement. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most basic issues in society, this fact that every society needs institutions that tie us to reality, that tether us to reality. And ideally, they do more than just that, these institutions. They should also make us happier as individual people, and they should make us stronger as members of a community. Social media is one of the great institutions in our society. We're going to be talking today about whether social media can do those things. HxA is just really honored and delighted to be working with Project Liberty and their team to put this event on and other events to come. And with that, I'll turn it over to my amigo, John Haidt.
Well, thanks, Laura. Thanks, John. So my name is John Haidt. I co-founded Heterodox Academy in 2015 with about 15 other professors who were concerned about some changes that were happening in universities. A strange new culture, a very orthodox, intense, moralistic culture was coming in. We didn't know it then, but now we can see that that all happened because of social media, meaning when everybody got hyper-connected, around 2012 is when the turning point was. Before then, most young people were on flip phones. By 2012, 2013, they were mostly on smartphones with social media. Twitter and Facebook had changed. So we were sort of the canaries in the coal mine. We were one of the first institutions that got hit by this radically new mindset that comes out of the new technology. And I'm also part of Project Liberty. When I met Frank McCourt and the people at Laura and others at Project Liberty, and I saw that they were coming up with a possible, if not a solution, they were thinking hard about this problem and coming up with a vision of a tech ecosystem that would host technology that was more conducive to human flourishing. So I'm very excited to see the two organizations working together here to put on this event. So I actually want to start by asking you how you're doing, but I'm going to do it in a different way from Laura. Laura was doing it like to warm you up, and the answer was great. But what I want to ask is, how are you doing? Like, when you look ahead 10, 20 years, and you think about what technology is doing to our society, and all of the promise and all of the peril, when you look ahead, do you feel in your heart a sense of, wow, yes, this is going to be amazing? Or do you feel a sense in your heart of, oh my God, how much longer do we have to live? So first, let me see. So raise your hand if you're more on the optimistic side. Raise your hand if you're feeling more optimistic. Okay, good. Good. So we have about a quarter of you who are blind to a quarter of you who are optimists. And how many of you are more on the pessimistic side? Raise your hand. Okay, so it's, and that seems to be sort of the general consensus in society. There are still optimists, but more people are pessimistic. Now, maybe people are, just worried unnecessarily, as almost always happens when there's a revolution in technology. People are afraid. This happens with every new technology. So anyway, what are we here to talk about tonight? The question, the statement in the invite that you all got, that you saw, it said, social media has reshaped society for better and worse. It has been particularly challenging for institutions, including universities, as John was saying, for institutions that make meaning and build knowledge. Can we do better? Can we use social technologies to make us smarter, wiser, and less polarized? So that's what we're here to discuss. And we have this extraordinary panel. These three people that I'll introduce to you now, they all have very different kinds of expertise, and they all have, we all share concerns, but they come at it from very different perspectives. So here are the three panelists that are going to help us think through these issues. The first is Sinead Bovell. And I guess, why don't you come up and take your seat so people can see you. Sinead is a futurist and the founder of WAYE, W-A-Y-E, an organization that prepares youth for a future with advanced technologies. Sinead is a regular tech commentator for CNN talk shows and morning shows. She has been dubbed the AI educator for non-nerds. Now, it's a funny thing. I just realized she was dubbed the AI educator. She just told us beforehand, there's a rumor going around on social media that she is an AI. But when you combine AI with advanced robotics, Sinead Bovell. And actually more to the, to date, she's educated over 200,000 young entrepreneurs on the future of technology. She's an 8-time United Nations speaker. She's given formal addresses to presidents, royalty, and Fortune 500 leaders on topics ranging from cybersecurity to artificial intelligence. She currently serves as a strategic advisor to the UN International Telecommunications Union on digital inclusion. Next, Christine Rosen. Christine, come on up.
Reveal.
Christine is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, where her research focuses on the impact of technology on culture and human relationships. A historian by training, who has also written widely about bioethics, Rosen was an early critic of social media platforms and, with colleagues, founded the New Atlantis, a journal of technology and society, in 2003 to promote debate and research into the impact of emerging technologies. She's also a fellow at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture at the University of Virginia. And when I was just looking through an article that she wrote in 2007 in the New Atlantis, back when, as she said, the big platform was MySpace, and there was also Facebook, but really it was about MySpace was the big deal then. But she had this really, really great line in there where she talked about how the inscription, the famous inscription over the temple at Delphi was "Know thyself," but social networking systems, as they used to be called, were changing it. So the new inscription is "Show thyself." And that was at the beginning of the era, and boy, what has happened since then. Our third panelist is Aviv Ovadya. Aviv, come on up. Aviv works at the intersections of AI, platforms, democracy, and deliberation. He's an affiliate at Harvard's Berkman Klein Center and GovAI, and consults for civil society organizations, technology companies, and funders. His work involves developing practical, deliberative, democratic processes for governing technology, ranking systems that can help bridge divides. He's also known for raising alarms around AI and social media's impact on democracy, starting in 2016, and he has supported both generative AI and social companies in mitigating the risks of their products. So please, a round of applause to welcome all three panelists. Okay, so let's see. So I thought, I guess I'll sit down now. So I thought that a way to start this, it's always good, I think, it's always good for in the first round to have the audience just sort of understand where people are coming from. And here we have this really interesting sort of division of time, which is November 30th of 2022. That's the day that ChatGPT was released, and since then it's dominated conversation, I would say more than Elon Musk did. Remember that time there was a war in Ukraine, but really all we could talk about was Elon Musk and Twitter at the time. It was insane. In any case, so I thought what we would do is I'd start with a question to each of them. Go back to December 29th, before ChatGPT. What were your top concerns? Speaking of social media, we're all concerned about social media and what it's doing to society, institutions. So I guess I'll just go along in this order. Christine, what were you thinking about working on? What were you doing about social media before AI?
Well, the thing that's been on my mind since I'm in Washington, D.C. for my sins, were some of the policies that we can develop both at the state and the federal level to assist parents in particular, but society as a whole with this problem, acknowledging that it's only fairly recently that we've seen it as a problem. If you go back to those early days, and it was the promise of social media to bring us all together, make us better people, democracy would flourish worldwide because we had social media platforms, and now we're amid the bitter ashes of what we've created and used. But I do think, and I was one of these parents just about 5 years ago who would say, we shouldn't be meddling in the decisions parents make for their children, we should trust them, but parents need our help. And children need our help. And as all of you who follow John's work knows, it's quite critical now, particularly for Gen Z. They have been raised online, they've been raised using these social media platforms, and they're in crisis. So I'm looking at a lot of things. I mean, just last week we had a new bipartisan piece of legislation, amazingly bipartisan. I mean, we're talking about Senator Tom Cotton, a Republican from Arkansas, and the senator from Hawaii, Schatz. They could not be more opposite in most of their political leanings. They came together along with another Democratic colleague, another Republican colleague, to produce a federal bill to protect kids on social media, suggesting age limits and verification, and even a pilot project that might help companies and parents figure out how to verify age online. So I've written a lot about, I don't think anyone under the age of 16 should be allowed on social media. States like Utah, California, Virginia, others have proposed legislation. Utah in particular is a pretty stringent state law. So we're trying things now. They're not all gonna work. Some of them raise concerns about civil liberties, free speech and whatnot, but we're starting to finally do that democratic experiment with social media that I think is long overdue. So that's what's been on my mind lately.
Okay, good. Thank you, Christine. Sinead?
Yeah, I'd say in November, and as somebody who kind of studies the future for a living, I was in, I guess, a state of panic and using a lot of my platforms to educate on what I believe is the most dangerous technology right now, which is social media. That the environment where we think the most important conversations are happening, which they aren't, those are in labs and all sorts of other places, is not only fractured, but inherently adversarial for all sorts of reasons. We are not at a state where we can incubate what is in the pipeline, the technologies that are in the pipeline. And that to me raised a lot of alarm bells. And so it wasn't just as we look out into the future and we see what's in the technological pipeline and this cracked foundation, as the cracks are growing, it was also all of these kind of additional layers, the beauty filters and what that does to to self-esteem, and how that has a feedback loop back into the next generation that we're kind of passing all of this to. There are all of these kind of spokes on this wheel that were largely out of whack. So I was very vocal on my platforms about this is a really big problem. And it doesn't matter how great and exciting or scary we think that technologies are in the pipeline, I can assure you that this is the one that needs the most attention.
Good, thank you. Aviv?
Yeah, I guess in some ways there's a through line here where I've had sort of three things that I've been thinking about the most and working on for the last few years. And one of them is around ranking on social media. Another one is on the impacts of what's now called generative AI. Before it was called deepfakes, but synthetic media, lots of different names, but generative AI is the sort of clean word for it. that's the rebranding of synthetic media. And that was true before ChatGPT because we could see it coming, from 7 years, I mean, much more, but that was like when it was really clear that there were going to be significant societal impacts in the near term. And then finally, the governance of this technology. Whether it be social media or AI, all these things have transnational impacts. They're not just bound to what a single country's laws can influence. And even when you go back to that ranking on social media, what is that? That's ranking AI, right? They're ranking algorithms. It's not what we're thinking about when we talk about ChatGPT, but there's the same, it is a system that was created in order to solve a problem at scale that wasn't possible to do before we had this kind of AI. And it completely reshaped the incentives, economically, politically, entertainment, everything around it, and of course education, as you've talked about. So those were all on my mind before, and then there was a transition that I guess we'll be talking about next.
Okay. Yeah. So when I was a kid, there was a game show on TV called Beat the Clock, and they would bring young married couples out who would compete to win like a dishwasher, refrigerator, things like that. And it'd be like, okay, what you have to do is here's a bunch of tennis balls, and you have to throw it through this big hoop. That's it. Sounds easy. Okay. Oh, and you have to wear a blindfold and be hanging upside down from your ankles. Okay. And so they would always introduce something that would make the task almost impossible. Okay, so we were all, concerned with the things we were concerned about. Oh, and now you have to do it with everybody in the world having generative AI and the ability to create as many deepfakes as they want every second. How does that change things? So where are we going? What do you think is sort of coming down the pipeline? Actually, I'll start with you, Sinead, because you had some thoughts about this before, and then people just add in. How is generative AI going to change social media?
So there are a few ways to think about it, and one way is if all things stay the same and we just kind of evaluate the model from the present, we have a system that can generate in real time any sort of information, whether it's true or not, at scale, at a fraction of the cost. But it's not just what happens when that gets disseminated on social media, right? If you look at the environment we're in, which is inherently adversarial and polarized, what happens when generative AI, each side or each community or each kind of inherent adversarial group has their own version of ChatGPT, and the information they source from is entirely based on their own ideology. And if that sounds a little bit alarming, unfortunately, it's actually already in the works. So I won't kind of drop names, but that's just one of the many ways. And in addition to a social media stream where we don't really know what's real and what's fake, the quality of the technology is just going to get better and better. And that creates a lot more challenges. And again, that is under the umbrella of if all things stay the same and we just let generative AI kind of take over social media as is. I don't think that that's what's going to happen, but that's where it could go.
Listen to every word this woman says. It's absolutely correct, because the crisis of evidence that we've been dealing with, and particularly in the last 10 years, I'd say, with misinformation, disinformation, concerns about how information spreads, information siloing, the old filter bubble was the Eli Lair phrase from way back, I think that it was Pariser, thank you. Those are now on speed. I mean, it's just so accelerated. And I think we have to talk about why we haven't solved the crisis of evidence from stage one, and now we're already into stage two. And people are worried about stopping innovation, and innovation is a good thing, but the sort of panic level has reached all the way up to the top. A recent Google AI gentleman just stepped down, and we've had a lot of concerns, calls for pauses. All of those things should be immediately considered. Because innovation is great, but if you innovate yourself into extinction, then what is your innovation for?
Hard to follow that, but we're going to probably get some more extinction.
You're the optimist.
Relatively speaking, he is. Yeah.
I think what changed for me is, so from my perspective, everything that we're seeing in ChatGPT, that was already even available through GPT-3 to some extent for a number of years, and that was already changing the game. But the thing that really changed was the way that everyone saw that it had changed, right? And this meant that there's incredible flows of sort of money and power around investment in this technology and in accelerating it so that the rate of change has gone from, okay, OpenAI will release something every once in a while, maybe a few other companies will do things that are interesting, to every single company that has any capacity at all that might get in on the game is trying to move this forward as fast as possible, regardless of any of the consequences. And that obviously has impacts both directly and even like literally people who might have been working on some of the mitigations of potential harms of either generative media or social media are now working on accelerating it because that's what their bosses are telling them to do. These are from first-hand accounts. That is happening. But you also just have an acceleration of technological capacity without an acceleration of governance capacity. And that is the thing that for me is like probably the single most important challenge that we need to face as a society.
I'll just add to that because I've been working on an essay with Eric Schmidt about what AI will do to social media, and many of the things we talk about, it'll come out in the Atlantic on Friday, but many of them have already just been mentioned. But just one that we had there that I think hasn't been mentioned is the rise of gorgeous super influencers. So already, imagine if you go to a casino and the slot machines are designed by a lot of psychologists to maximize the degree to which you're going to lose money. Well, imagine if when you walk in, they could do a scan of your DNA and your brain. They could figure out, oh, let's make a new slot machine for this guy. Oh, and let's look back on every picture he's ever liked, and we'll make a companion for him who's this beautiful woman or man or whatever he likes, but it'll be the sexiest person alive, and she'll be brilliant, and she'll be witty, and she'll stand with him while he gambles or bets on sports or whatever. So a world in which the companies now, they've been working for 100 years, the development of advertising and manipulating consumers, we ain't seen nothing yet. And it's going to happen not just to us, but to our children and to our elderly parents and grandparents. So I think it's a whole new world that it's just hard to even imagine what could come down the pike. Let's consider, and we do have some optimists here in the room, and we, especially at Heterodox Academy, we really value the John Stuart Mill statement, he who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. We have to seek out challenges, we have to seek out criticism. So we're going to talk a little bit more here, and then we're actually going to have about 7 to 10 minutes. We'll ask you to be in conversation with just 2 or 3 people, small groups, come up with questions for us and challenges. I'm especially hoping that the optimists here will push back on them, on all of us, and so we'll have a chance for it. So be thinking of counter arguments, because of course the tone here is pretty negative, as you see. But let's try to spell out what if things go well. Let's imagine, and as Aviv put it before, there is a path to a future that's amazing. The technology generally has made our lives better. Of course it has. So actually, I'll start with you, Aviv, then. Trace out first, suppose everything goes really well. Is there an optimistic scenario? Is there a beautiful future? And just trace out one path by which we might get there.
Yeah, I think, imagine you, instead of having the super manipulative supermodel, imagine you had the incredibly helpful sort of coach and guide and supporter who was always there with you, always ready to raise you up, and not just raise you up on their own, but help ensure that your community around you was there for you and helping support you, of actual humans, not just the AI assistant. There is a world where that happens, and it happens for individuals, and it happens in a way that affects the collectives and the governance. And there are ways that we can improve the sort of archaic modes that we've been sort of making decisions at scale. And all this is possible. We need to actually do it.
Yeah, I think I'm optimistic about social media and how things might change for 2 reasons. So right now, social media, Facebook is 7,000 days old, Instagram 5,000. It took us a few decades to get seatbelts in cars, so we are the pre-seatbelt era. So there is still time for change, and I think social media will change in either one of 2 ways. One, we regulate it into change, or 2, in a world where we're bombarded with, say, generative AI, the actual value, right, it's still a transaction. And if the value we get on social media starts to go down because every other post, is that real, is that not, was that generative AI, was it not, becomes just not as engaging or not as great of a landscape, we're going to change our behavior. and will change away from what the current model is. And that, of course, we're still in the unknown. Maybe that we see, again, the rise of different websites or the rise of specific journalists we tune into, whatever it may be. But I think that there is destined for a behavior change in social media, and we'll get there one of two ways. We'll let the fundamentals of business change our behavior, or hopefully we can regulate towards a more optimistic scenario ahead of that.
I'm not going to be that optimistic, but I agree with Sinead, because what it implies is that we need more healthy competition for platforms, and we cannot have that until we start looking at the size and scale of the social media platforms that currently dominate. Most of Meta's Facebook, I know I'm old, I keep calling it Facebook, most of their users aren't even in the United States, they're overseas. They are the size and they behave as if they are a nation state. They came and briefed the organization I work for, their head of safety, and now they're very concerned about giving parents choices because they are looking at the legislative calendars in states and in Congress, and they're worried. A little too late for some of our tastes, but they don't have an incentive to allow for creation. And when little upstarts create something, they buy them out. When innovative academics working in small labs, perhaps with some private money thrown at them as well, create something unusual, they buy them out. So, the free market works aggressively in these scenarios, but we need to find a way as a society to support those smaller projects, because some of those projects, by their nature, Sinead was saying, they shouldn't get too big. They should remain small. They should be for 12 and 13-year-old girls who are really into a particular kind of, say, music. And there could be all kinds of ways to monitor that, keep that platform safe for those people. You could let many flowers bloom. And for now, what we've done is actually allow a couple of huge companies to hoover up all of that. And if you look at the founding of Instagram, those founders left after Facebook bought them for a reason. And that's because what they were told, which is they could be a little in-house, creative, quirky thing, didn't last. So I feel we need more space in the market, and we need investors who are willing to throw some money at those little quirky things and allow them to try to flourish.
So this is a good point to put in a plug for Project Liberty, one of the sponsors, because as Christine mentioned, like sort of a place where more flowers can bloom. Sinead mentioned different business models, and as I understand it, this one of the central ideas of Project Liberty is that as we moved from Web 1, where you could just post things, to Web 2, where it was two-way, you could do commerce, we really got that wrong. Web 2 has been a disaster, but we're moving to Web 3, which will be built on blockchain and offers just very different possibilities for making sure something is real, for tracing, making sure things are authentic, for owning your own data. And so just if you don't know what it is, please go to projectliberty.io, because this is, I think we were talking beforehand, all of us are pretty pessimistic if we stay on the path we're on, but we all recognize there are ways we can get off this path, and I think Project Liberty is one of those.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
We've done this with the way we eat in this country in recent years, right? We want to know the source of our food, and we want to know who made this, who raised the animal, who raised the crop. There's no reason we can't do that with our technology. Who created this content? What are their goals? What are their purpose? Do we support that purpose? Do we actually want to spend our money on that? So we have examples in other arenas where we've done this successfully.
Okay, so now that we've established that it's definitely not necessarily the case that we're all going to die from this, I would like us to actually raise the nightmare scenario. How would that happen? So one of you was just saying in Silicon Valley, the thing that people say to us is, what's your scenario? Like, how many years do we have left? Or who was it? Wait, who was saying that? When he was saying it?
It was him.
Yeah, Aviv, yeah.
The optimist.
Yeah. So there is. So the question I want to ask you, and it just whoever wants to answer. A lot of people have a sense of impending doom. We've heard some of the scenarios about existential risk if AI becomes conscious and wipes us out, like in the Terminator movies. So there are some visions of the end of humanity like that are science fiction, although now they're a little closer possibly to reality. But if things go really badly, what does it look like in 10 years? Anyone?
Someone began playing soothing music.
Sure, I'll jump in. So I think there's sort of two ways to think about this. One of them is around sort of the information ecosystem and the ways that we're consuming information and the ways it affects our democracy, for example. So I sort of talk about sort of reality apathy, where people just give up on trying to make sense of what's real and what's not, and retreat into their corners, just stop caring except for what's directly essentially in front of them, and maybe from things that they personally know very, very well. And then there's, then you have reality sharding, where we're in our sort of completely disjoint sort of shards of reality that just like, they do not intersect, and they are at complete odds with each other. That's on the information side. But there's also this sort of broader, like, what do these advances in technology mean, and especially these more generative or general purpose systems. And when you're talking about that, you're just, think about what a corporation is and what it, it's optimizing for a goal, and that's generally profit. And what happens if the corporation is run by humans and it's going to do something bad? Maybe sometimes there's something that prevents like the really bad things from happening. And what happens if there isn't a human sort of involved in those decision-making processes? And what happens if those are more effective because it's faster? And those, and humans being less involved makes your company do better. What does that mean for the world, and what does that mean for the resources that we have access to as humans? You can sort of draw out the conclusion there, and it's not very pretty.
And I can add, and I don't love painting pessimistic scenarios because I believe that the optimistic ones are very possible. But I think we actually all think of things going badly as this big existential event, and that actually makes it easier to comprehend. But I think what the truth of the matter is, if you plot this out on factors of geopolitics and macroeconomics, it actually just means we're going to stop progress. And progress doesn't just mean technology. How would everybody feel if we existed the way we did in the 90s, but we were the only country that existed that way? So when you think about it in that type of a sense, people can progress in other areas, but you become at a standstill because we are fundamentally fractured. So there's no progress in health, in education, in all of the different other areas. And I think that is actually, to me, it's a slower burn, but that to me is the more realistic existential crisis. I'm not really worried about Terminator, and for now, if you get chased by a robot, shut your door, because this is really hard. But I think it's the slow burn towards to stagnant and to the lack of progress.
Can I go dystopian since I'm the last?
Go all dystopian. These guys have been too gentle.
I will go dystopian, but one of my sons is a huge reader of science fiction, so this is he always has to like talk through the science fiction he's read, so I sort of got it all through osmosis. But my fear is that we'll start to prefer, and then in a way sort of passively allow the outsourcing of all the things that make us great as human beings to technology, because it's efficient. First it's efficient, well first it's cool and nifty, then it's really efficient and you get used to it, and then you can't imagine actually doing the stuff you used to do without it, and then pretty soon you've slid it, then you're in like the Wall-E phase where it's so easy, why get up and go get something for yourself. But it's particularly the outsourcing of our responsibilities and obligations to others that worries me. I remember when the first the Pero robot seal came out in Japan, and they were like, this is fantastic, we're gonna bump this in the lap of every person in an old folks home, and they'll be happy. And I thought, okay, I get the impulse, aging population, they didn't have as many people, they wanted people to have a level of happiness when they were in these facilities. But it also allowed the children of those people to avoid going to see them, because they had the seal now, and they loved the seals. They loved the seals in a way that, Weizenbaum and other early computer scientists who created ELIZA and the first sort of chatbots basically were stunned. They loved them, they bonded with them. So my concern is that we will create these things, and we're already doing it with AI and some of the AI chatbots, that really will be a better replacement, because it never turns off, it never gets tired, it's not cranky unless you design it that way, and it gives us a really false sense of control and the kind of hubris that all the ancients warned us against long before we had smartphones.
No, that's very powerful, and I have been haunted by a lot of biblical and ancient Greek narratives, like the Tower of Babel metaphor, the Prometheus metaphor, the Frankenstein story. I think these are all really helping us think through what might be happening. I'll just add my own piece to what the future could hold on the dystopian side, which is that we've evolved. One of the great lessons. So I used to be on the left, and then I wrote The Righteous Mind, and I realized, you know what, you have to listen to left, right, and libertarian. All three have really great perspectives, and you need all three. And the great conservative lesson I learned, especially from Edmund Burke and from many conservatives who write about Edmund Burke, is that structures, society, order, institutions, these things are all really hard to build and really easy to destroy. And our institutions have evolved over a long time. And in America, we have these democratic institutions that evolved slowly, and more than other countries, ours are hard to update, but we have somewhat. And it may be that we're now at the end of the Gutenberg period, the period that was based on books and writing, and had all kinds of ways of verifying truth and accumulating public sentiment. And it may be that we're at the end of that era, and there are cycles in history. And so social media, I think, has been really pushing us, making it that our institutions don't work or can't work as they're supposed to. We're seeing this in universities. It's very frightening. And now it's spreading to news organizations to some extent. It's spreading to government in many ways. And so what I'm mostly haunted by is the idea that our institutions cannot be adapted and will collapse. And now there are cycles in history. We may well build others that maybe will bring us to this amazing future that is theoretically possible. So, okay, so that's the dark scenario. I really wanted us to go like, what's the best that could happen? What's the worst that could happen? And the last topic we'll do before we open up for you to discuss for a few minutes and then for you to ask us, is the question of, okay, what are your best thoughts on how we can control, regulate, legislate, all those sorts of things. I'm going to start with Christine because here she is working at the premier free market think tank, and you'd expect, as sometimes AEI panelists do when I see them in congressional testimony, oh no, there should be no regulation. The market can take care of this. But Christine doesn't believe that. So Christine, what are your thoughts on how regulation, and not just federal, we all jump to federal regulation, but there are other ways. So what are your thoughts?
Right, so I am the perennial skunk at the garden party at every meeting we have about tech. My libertarian colleagues, I adore them. I agree with them on some things. We fight a lot, and that's because they're economists and I'm a historian. So I think it's a healthy battle that's ongoing and will never be solved, although the historians are on the winning side. So what I would say is, first of all, I am a small c conservative who prefers to see as local as possible solutions. So my favorite early adopter solution was a group of parents, I think it started in Texas and then it spread to other states, who were worried about their kids' use of smartphones. And so they started a project called Wait Until 8th. And they enlisted, because what they found is that one parent could say, you know what, you can't have a phone. But if all their peers had phones, that made it very difficult as a community to sort of monitor behavior. So they started this group, and you'd sign a pledge saying, we're going to wait until 8th grade to get our kids a smartphone. And enough families would do this that it actually created a bit of a movement. It was good. It was good for the community, good for the schools who liked it as well. So that's my ideal scenario, right? But in a country the size of ours, you also need laws. State laws are very interesting to me right now. Utah being quite draconian. In fact, I think they've gone a little too far. I am a free speech, hardcore free speech person. My civil libertarian knee jerks at some of the things they want to regulate. These will be tested in court. So we have two things we can do. We have local and federal legislation, and then you have lawsuits. And there have been quite a few lawsuits brought against Meta in particular because of Instagram, about the damage it's causing. Post-Facebook files, revelations, families are suing because their daughter became anorexic because at 8 years old, she was on Instagram. 8 years old. By the time she was 10, she was hospitalized. And they want to hold someone responsible, and they want some sort of teeth behind these age verification systems which aren't being enforced. So I think we do need enforcement of age verification. I would like to see no kid under the age of 16 on a social media platform. They were not designed for children. They don't belong on these platforms. And by banning them from the major platforms, again, an opportunity is created for a savvy person to create a social media platform for kids at certain ages, knowing what we know about developmentally appropriate behavior. So federal legislation for me is always the last straw. I find the Cotton Chats bill that was just proposed fine. I love the pilot program that they put in there. The pilot program is great to talk about. All the libertarian folks I know don't want the government to have a lot of information about them. Totally legitimate. finds a way to get around that concern by creating technological solutions to age verification. So it's pretty creative. So I'm happy to see that. I think we need a lot more of that, but we need also more of those civil society groups, groups of parents, schools. Schools should all, in a school district should all get together and say, you know what? You turn off your phone when you come in and you set it in your locker and you can't bring it in the classroom. You can make decisions as communities, but we have to take initiative as individuals to do that.
These are collective action problems, and they have to be solved collectively at some level. Good. Sinead?
Yeah, I'm optimistic because there are a lot of little tweaks that we can make that could actually have quite measurable impact. And the first is, we don't even really know what we're measuring, right? So what if we had standards where we measured toxicity on platforms or polarization, and there were companies that we could hold accountable to those measurements? A lot of other industries, we have standards, and we don't have that in social media yet. And so that could look like if something becomes toxic because of amplification, we turn down those dials. But there's just ways that we actually tap in to measure. Another thing that I'm optimistic about is the conversations around data actually have quite a big impact on social media. So the reason why you might get so enraged about something that an algorithm puts in front of you is because there's an entire supercomputer behind that knows that that's what's going to tweak your interest. But the less a social media platform knows about you, or the less an algorithm knows about you, the more generic or the less targeted that enragement is going to find you. So I think there's many reasons why upping our data policies are helpful, national security also being on that list. But another is it has a direct impact on our social media ecosystem and making things a little bit healthier. And then finally, I'll say, I know things seem kind of dire, but it's actually a really great thing that we're having these conversations, right? That you're turning on your news or your morning talk shows and you're hearing terms like AI ethics. We really have raised the bar and joined a societal conversation on these topics. And I think that that's still, marching towards the right direction, even though we do have a ways to go.
Okay, Aviv, you've done some very interesting work on ways of doing sort of a democratic governance and regulation. Tell us what you're thinking.
Yeah, so I guess there's sort of like two main threads here. So I'll go to that one second. But you were just talking about metrics, and I think that's absolutely critical. And the fact that it's been talking about this for 7 years, 6 years, that there still is no. I mean, right now there's. I just was asked. Well, sorry. There is an observatory, like an international observatory on sort of social media that's being developed, and that's going to, in theory, trying to get access to get the data for metrics. There's great work like Rebecca McKinnon's Ranking Digital Rights. We need that for social media in a deeper sense than we currently have it. So there's all that, but specifically, right now, the incentives on social media are focused on sort of engagement-based ranking. They're ranking things higher based on engagement. This is a simplification, but basically that's correct. And this comes down to this question of what are we optimizing for in society, right? And what is rewarded? What should be rewarded? And I've been advocating for a sort of change in perspective that by default these are divisive by default. The engagement-based ranking. We need something that's at least non-divisive by default. And this is not maybe the best way to describe that, but bridging-based ranking that is aiming to be bridging. Like that should be what we're aiming for. That should be the sort of the North Star. And we should have metrics on the extent to which things on like ranking systems are bridging or not. And so this is like just one of the most critical things that if you're not optimizing for this, we're just getting these centrifugal forces pushing us apart. And we need something that actually helps bring us back together at least a little bit. And
what if the rage-based rankings or engagement, are more profitable for companies than the bridging? Like, so how could you compel them, or what could anyone do to change that?
So, there's a bunch of there's a lot of legal challenges in any sort of regulation, at least in the US context. I'm not going to get into the details of those, but what I can say is that Facebook had actually run experiments where they used essentially bridging-based ranking for comments, and they found that it decreased bullying, decreased harassment, and it decreased the actual number of things that were content moderated. And so that essentially means that there's less cost to them because they don't need to deal with all the sort of the costs of the actual moderation. And so there are, and it also increase some engagement metrics, decrease some other engagement metrics. It's pretty complicated to sort of see how it all shook out. This is all from the Facebook files. But there is potentially even some internal incentive. It's just also a question of, does the person who runs the newsfeed, who let's say controls ranking, if they're being measured by engagement, while the person who's running content moderation is being measured by the cost of content moderation, like who gets more power in an organization, and how do you sort of make it so that the benefits of one sort of overshadow the benefits of the other? So that's on ranking. But the core thing is like, how do we even determine what should be optimized for? Like, who gets to make that decision? Who should it actually be? And so this is the question that's really been sort of important, because when I try to get companies to do this, they're just like, it's not up to us to make that call. You know, the default obvious thing to do is engagement, so we should just do that. And that's what people seem to want, right? But how do we actually get at what people really want, what they want to want, even in some cases? And so this led me down this path in the last 3 years, really digging into methods of democracy, actually going back to the ancient Greek that John was like, there is a method for making decisions that even a company can sort of have a third party do, like actually run the process where you pick people at random, essentially, by democratic lottery from a population, and ask them, hey, what should happen? This is not a survey, because it's not just asking people at random, but it's giving them access to experts, to stakeholders, all the best minds on the issue, paying them for their time, and having them deliberate to come to a conclusion on sort of what those principles that you're optimizing for are. And this sounds like crazy to maybe an American audience, but it's actually being done around the world, including at the EU level, for incredibly important decisions. And just to name two of them, one of them, a deliberative poll was used for the constitutional amendment process in Mongolia. And we've also had nuclear power policy, nuclear waste. All of these things have been sort of governed through and supported by such processes. And they work transnationally, because you can run a process where you're actually taking from the entire world people who are being impacted by that platform, who are representative of that world, and you can say, this is what the world actually wants. And I think that if we're going to get ahead of things like generative AI, where these impacts really are global, we're going to need to have governance that works across national boundaries. And so it's incredibly important for me to be thinking about what are the ways that we can do this. And now Meta is actually piloting this, which is incredibly exciting. I mean, Twitter was going to too before some unintentional sort of damage from the acquisition. So there is some momentum to actually be exploring this, which is incredibly exciting, and I want to see a lot more of it. I guess just the keyword, if you're looking, is like platform democracy or citizen assemblies of the actual process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, actually, that's very encouraging. I think Bill Clinton used to say, I don't know if this was original with him, but there's nothing wrong with America that can't be cured by what's right with America. And so he just gave us a vision of how there's nothing wrong with democracy and technology that can't be fixed in a way by appealing to a certain way of putting together democracy and technology. So thank you for that.